University research and in education. At the Philips Electronics in Holland, she was Director of Design Research, and for the European Commission, she led the technology research program Connected Community to explore new ways that technology can enhance relationships in local communities. She was head of interaction design at the Royal College of Art in London, and now she's head of design at the famous Glasgow School of Art. And today she will be speaking to us about design and the creative imagination, which is appropriate for our theme here, and how that has evolved with interaction design and about future transformation. So please join me in welcoming Irene to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Buongiorno. The theme of the conference is Art and Science Balance. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about creativity and the imagination, and in particular interaction design and transformation design. So if we start with the work that we're all involved in, to do with investigation into psychology, social and technical networks, then where better to do it in the city of Florence, which itself was an experimental laboratory in the time of the Renaissance. So taking the theme of the conference, art and science, we can draw attention to the fact that it is possible to creatively synthesize those two together, which is the theme of what we do as designers and researchers in order to enhance quality of life. Now, in a city such as this, as an embodiment of that, you can see as you walk around, I'm sure, and all of us have experienced it, just what a height of quality can be achieved when these things are done in the way that they have been achieved here. So to quote an example, here in Florence, we have the incredible technological innovation of the Duomo. So the architect, Filippo Brunelleschi, was commissioned by competition to design the dome on the cathedral in Santa Maria del Fiore. He won the competition to do basically at the time what was thought to be impossible, and that was to render a cupola which had never been made before. It was to be the biggest, and the technology did not arrive at the time when the design was made, and so the cathedral started to be built without any idea how it could be completed. So as they went on, this became, of course, a bigger and bigger problem, hence the competition, and hence the proposal from various architects as to how to solve this. He won the competition in spite of the fact that he would not reveal the innovation. It was a closely guarded secret. In any case, he was then awarded this commission, and as we all know, went on to build the cathedral, which I'm sure we'll all enjoy in the course of this week here in Florence. And he was then named Ingenio, a genius, term invented by Italian philosophers to describe this natural ability for original invention. Today we call it innovation, radical breakthrough in thinking and creativity to realize a solution. So I think it's a very, very good example of the belief in solution, because the building was started before they had it, and the idea that it would come in the prototyping. It would come as part of the process. I think this is very relevant to the way we work today. In any case, this also realized in Florence the role of the artist, the designer, the sculptor, as a person, a creative genius in their own right. They would set up their studios. They would start to work within the city. This also had not happened before. So you can see the rise of the profession of art and everything that came after it, including what we do in terms of design. So the dawn of humanism, the individual, subjectivity, experience, quality of life, and you could say the end of that is what we enjoy today, the birth of modernity. And Florence is where this started. So again, what better place for us to be having our CHI conference, the city of creative synthesis. Today I'm going to talk to you with particular relevance to such a setting about the Ruis Window. It's a visualization of creative imagination that I've worked on. And then I want to open the Ruis Window and look at interactivity and transformation. If we look back in time and we imagine how we have imagined the imagination, if that sounds okay. How do we think imagination works? And typically, even from medieval and Renaissance times, I think this is our picture. We have images in our mind. We imagine things that do not exist yet, perhaps, in the real world. So this drawing and illustration is still very much the kind of language that we use and we think about in terms of the imagination and creativity today. Image in the mind. I think all of our work concerns embodiment and visual imagination. And it's very interesting to note, also in history, that we can learn from, is the use of the visual in terms of memory. This is Giordano Bruno's memory palace. And he constructed it as a place in his mind to remember things. So at a time when there was no printing and publishing as we know it today, how did you remember knowledge and information? Well, you remembered it in your head, but to help, you imagined a space, and in that space, you placed information, and you could call it your memory palace. So it was an information device, you could say, that was an imaginary one, a structure to remember things. And this is how it was visualized at the time. This is how your memory palace or mine might look. The other great mnemonic device, which you will see many examples of in the city of Florence, is the Ruis Window. This window is also a celebration of technology. The architects at the time were able to raise up with the minimum amount of stone, the maximum amount of light and color. So it meant that when you were in that space, it would be what we call today immersive. It was the biggest screen, and it was moving through light. So in terms of the technology at the time, this was dramatic. Again, a creative synthesis of the highest level of aesthetic form with technology that enabled them to lift these weights of glass into the cathedrals. The interesting thing, if you study Ruis windows, which I have done, I did it as part of the research that Arne mentioned, Connected Community for European Commission. We were interested in memory and how we remember. And so I collected examples of what I called mnemonic devices, ways that helped us remember. And the Ruis window is one of them. This is the information structure of a Ruis window. You can see it looks familiar. It's almost like a menu system or a grid in our terms. And that grid actually did have a structure. It was a way to remember a story. And the story had a sequence. So the numbers that you see are the narrative structures of a particular story. Having read that and learned it, you would remember. And then you only needed to see the window again, and you could recall the story. So, in this kind of form, it's highly visual, of course, it's highly creative, it's technological, and it's a precursor to our information technologies, you could say, of today. I want to present to you a Ruis window that will describe and define the creative imagination, the way that we all creatively work. So we apply it as a structured process within design, but of course, all of us in the work that we're doing uses creativity in our everyday lives, and particularly in complex situations. So, if I was to describe it in broad terms, I would describe it thus. The creative imagination has to do with understanding oneself and your own motivations and interests, being able to see the world actively around you, imagine possibilities, and articulate solutions. To visualize this, I have created this Ruis window, and I'm going to describe each of these sections in turn and give you a flavor of what that feels like. I think you will all recognize each of these parts. So, the idea, the self, the object. To activate those and take a stance, I would propose to you that these are modalities in which we can work. We have certain ways of being, ways of seeing the world, ways of thinking, and ways of making. If you think about prototyping, that is really involved in ways of making. Conceptual design is involved in ways of thinking. Ethnography and user-centered design is looked at seeing people's worlds. And ways of being is the translation of our own desire to make a difference in that world. One by one, ways of being. Ways of being, I could have put up many different words there, but these are the kinds of words that perhaps encapsulate this area to do with our own motivations, our own values, our own personality, our own experience, and the reasons that we choose to do what we're doing. We're all here at this conference because we have the motivation to study computer-human interaction, obviously. We will be coming to that for different reasons, to make a difference within that context. I think it's very interesting for all of us to interrogate, in a sense, the reasons that we do particular things in order to develop ourselves, to make a difference in the world, but to learn and transform ourselves. This has got to do with, therefore, identity, the development of our own self in relation to our work and the world that we live in. So, key words in this area when we are working creatively is the motivation and having an open mind, being open to different possibilities. Ways of seeing. I think this is a very large area in terms of interaction design and our work. Interactivity and relational experience, by its very nature, is externally focused out into the world. We find reasons to do things and to do them together. So if we look at something like empathy, the great economist Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, also wrote a beautiful book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in it, he put forward the view, which I think we would all be sympathetic to, is that one of the best uses of the imagination is to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. So in terms of user-centered design or ethnography, any of the techniques that we use, we're using all of them, we could say, in order to discover what it's like to be somebody else. And if we can discover that and feel that, we can then do something within that situation. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Romantic poet, we all know the poem Kubla Khan, I think, wrote about the primary imagination and the secondary imagination. And the primary imagination he defined as actively seeing the world. So we can apply our imaginations not just to the inside vision, like the first picture I showed, but to see what's going on around us. We all know the feeling if we put a camera up in front of our eye, we see, we are more attentive as we walk around. If we have that quality more, then we are working like Da Vinci, like the painters and so on, in really studying our world and inspiring ourselves by what we see. So Coleridge defined this as the primary imagination, and as he walked around the Lake District of England with his friend Wordsworth, they really made it their work and effort to actively see the world that they were participating in, and they wrote about that. So this area about seeing is really, if you say something should come out of it, something that we all experience when we look around, in terms of design, is insight. So this is before the idea. It's somewhat deeper, you could almost say, than the idea. You see something that inspires you or upon which you want to act, and that is your insight. So this is highly involved in perception, of course, and the world of possibility. Moving on, ways of thinking. In the design process, this would be the area of conceptual design. And as we all know, it's not sufficient just to have many interesting ideas. it's also a great art and a science to find out which ones are the best ideas. So I have up there representational diversity, being able to show ideas and visualize them in many different forms, but also to recognize the good ones. How do we do that? We test them, we expose them, we show them to people, and we make judgments ourselves about which are best. So when I teach students, I say it's 50% the creation of idea, it's 50% working out how to judge which are the highest quality. So other things very much involved in this area, the use of metaphor, the generation of ideas and concepts, model making, and so on. I could, again, and we all will have our different words for this area of how we think, how we generate new ideas. But this is all ways of thinking linked to the imagination, of course. Creativity, part of this story, and intelligibility, which simply means it has to be an idea that is recognized by somebody other than ourselves. For it to have value, it must have social value. So, ways of making, some familiar words, I think, from our world also. Crafting, building, detailing, prototyping, scenario generation, storytelling, making ideas tangible, visible, and therefore experienceable by other groups, and detailing. Again, we have a whole language, I think, that describes all of the different ways in which we can make in order to expose ideas to other people. What is interesting, I think, in this area of instantiation is that these ideas have become embodied and, in a sense, have their life in the world. It's a great power of design of any idea. As soon as we make it physical or visual in any form, it can be shared. This is the reason to prototype, of course, as we all know, very, very early in the design process. If you have the very first sketch or idea and are able to show it, then the embodiment means that there can be feedback. So in all of the design process research, which I've worked on, we've been looking at ways as to prototyping from day one, the idea from day one. If you have the first sketch, it can be shown to someone. And then we know that that process is one of iteration. So the days of building and crafting and then exposure when something was perfect or almost perfect are perhaps to some extent over, and that we have design processes, as we know, that are much more iterative between design, technology, social science, and prototyping. So this is about embodiment and using it as a tool and a creative tool. Materiality, tangible computing, sits in this area, of course. Our world is a material world. We all are very familiar with one that we could also call the virtual or the informational. But somewhere that world also meets the material. It meets it in our computers. It meets it in our mobile phones. So the material gives access to that. And here, again, if we take reference to Florence, we can see a laboratory in a city which has a history of materiality that we can interrogate. The interesting thing is, of course, something like this, when you put it all together, it looks quite chaotic, and intentionally so, because I think this actually represents a little bit more of the feeling of how we really think and really work. It's not sequential. We don't go through it step by step in the way that I showed. It feels and looks a little bit more like this. You can start anywhere and find your way through the creative process. Some of us start working by making something and showing it to somebody else, and then developing the idea, and then thinking what it means. It doesn't matter. So this is the full, if you like, Ruis Window in terms of creativity and the imagination, and how we navigate that. We will have our individual ways of doing this. So what is interesting, I think, in this is, one, yes, indeed, chaos to a certain extent, although we can structure it in various phases. And also, we can note that typically design, and if we study the history of design, is associated only with the upper two levels. the creation of new ideas, and making them visible. So the levels of motivation and the personality behind those ideas and the insight that was gained through interaction with the world has been a fairly recent development and is very much part of computer-human interaction in terms of its history. But if I were to characterize design or innovation or creativity, it typically addresses these two upper levels. What is the latest idea, and what does it look like? It does not go, as I describe it, below the waterline into levels of insight and transformation. So our work, and in many of the papers I've seen in this conference, the exploration of the social, the relational, the interactional, is at this kind of level. You can see the word experience there, and we use experience design as part of our way of thinking. So this interactive way of working and the tools that we use to negotiate this are much more part of our history in interaction design. So we can have a leading role in design terms in making this creative Ruis Window accessible, I think, to other areas. Interaction, the relationship with the social and the technical and the external world, and the necessary, in order to achieve balance, the theme of this conference, reflection. So when do we think? When do we have time to think in our society? Might be a more pertinent question. Here in Italy, we have the slow food movement as opposed to the fast food movement. I think we can all sympathize with that. If one is an interaction designer, you design the dynamics of time, which things are fast, which things are indeed slow. It's a kind of choreography. So interaction design, in my definition, is a design of a dynamic choreography through various visual, informational, and tactile modalities. So we're all musicians and choreographers to some extent, and we play with the material of time, and we play with the material of the digital. These are new crafts, and it's very interesting to me that here in Florence, in this Renaissance city, we can talk about the use of new craft in terms of digital and time. This is what we bring to Florence. So this dynamic between slow and fast and the quality of that interaction is really what computer-human interaction is embodying. So that has an external focus, ways of seeing, ways of making, when we're involved in looking at the outside world and the responses that people have to our ideas. And it has this also internal focus, where we are busy in thinking and motivating ourselves to the next step. So in itself, the creative process, our work, if we do it very well and very intelligently, is one that we can creatively score. So a question would be, how do you do that when we live in a world of highly pressured work environments in which there are no dynamics in diaries? There are no dynamics on online diaries. All time is the same, and it all gets filled in from day to day. Can we design, as interaction designers, a new dynamic, event-based time? So these are questions, I think, that we can pose ourselves because our material is open to that kind of dynamic. So here is Werner Heisenberg also pointing to the need for balance in human life in terms of activity and reflection. In interaction design, we can build this in the tools that we make, we can support this kind of quality, I think. Many people describe that the lives that we live, especially within the professional elite of the Western world, as being highly pressurized, highly stressed, in which the resource that we most miss, in fact, is time, which is quite strange, given that as interaction designers, it is the resource that we are most familiar with. So again, can we design things that are more human or more humane, that allow us to live our lives every day in a balance, an art-science balance? I'd like to move on now, following the look at the Ruis Window and the creative imagination. I'd like to map it on to interaction design and transformation design more explicitly. So I'm going to take the same 4 stages that I used at the beginning and really open them up to interrogate them from a design point of view. Having examined the creative imagination, again, we can use this as a resource. So starting again with the Ruis Window, I'm going to now translate it into 4 different areas. Starting, I think, from the last one, ways of making. I'll work in reverse this time. Ways of making are to do with, you could say, craft, the building of things. Ways of thinking in terms of conceptual design historically. If you place it in terms of the move from craft-based design to product-based design, the output in the next move in design history was towards product. We're talking here about the Industrial Revolution, of course. In the 20th and 21st century, and more recently, comes our craft, interaction design, this relational area with the rest of the world, and the new emergent discipline, transformation design, which is to do with distributing the design capability. A taxonomy. What is the difference between these 4 areas? Well, I'm not really going to propose to go through all of these individually, but if I open out this window and just take 1 or 2 examples, again, using Florence, if you like, as a backdrop. In terms of craft, many of the crafts that we know about in our own cultures are traditional. They are biographical, they are historical, they are passed down from generation to generation, and also typically they are one material. So as you walk about Florence, you will see goldsmiths, silversmiths, textile designers. They work through their particular material, and they have made that material their own. They can do anything with it. So like Brunelleschi, his work in stone or brick is his material. So this is the area of craft. Today, our craft, we could say, is digital. Digital craft, software as a material, even if we can't see it directly. But typically and historically, the world of craft has this kind of feeling about it. And each thing was made as a one-off. It was handmade. It was hand-tooled. So if your mother has ever made you something, if she has knitted you a jersey, she has made you skirts, hand-tool everything, it's a one-off. It's unique. It's individual. Interesting from that point of view is it's therefore, for the person who receives it, extreme high value, probably amongst the area of very precious things. This is typical of craft and the practice of craft, extreme mastery of material. If we look at product now as an object, things that are around us in the world, anything that is tangible as a product, then it has this kind of typology. This is where craft, also here in Florence, turned into a discipline. Art became a discipline and a profession and had a home in the studio. Product design in the 20th century, we talk about design studios. It comes from the same history. Here, we started to talk about something else, the user. This is where this word came into being. The product for the user, user-centered design. So here, materiality was more extensive. In making a product, more than one material would indeed be used. But it was still fairly stable. It was not dynamic like interaction design. We would make things like a watch or a pair of spectacles, and we did not expect them to change. They may age with some dignity, we hope, but they did not change. So things were made and built to be relatively stable and fixed. They had to last a long time. In our world, and this is where the big, I could actually draw a line right down the middle there, this is where the big break, almost a rupture came in design terms, because no longer was the focus on material, the focus was on design of dynamics. unstable, material and immaterial, virtual, real, informational. All of those things were part of this mixture. How could we imagine designing for that? If we go back to my discussion of the creative imagination, how could we imagine things that were not fixed, that people would use in different ways, in unpredictable ways, would appropriate them, would abuse them? And somehow we have made it our profession to try and answer that question, which is almost like the impossible question in terms of systems design, the kind of networks that we design that link many people together through material and immaterial objects. We design for that. And somehow we try to make that, to some extent, predictable, structured, but open enough in which the user will find a place, rather than being a closed system that they cannot affect or change. So I think in terms of interaction design, we have reached a very, very interesting place, because here with technological multiplicity of devices and portals and entry points, a kind of chaos like my Ruis Window is part of the world that we live in this discipline now, which is why we're here together, I guess, to examine it and discuss it and to look at that. But this, for the last 20 or 30 years or so, has been the big difference in design. It has changed, in my view, it's changed everything. If we now look on at transformation, transformation design is really about the design of capability. So if you imagine working with users to such an extent that they to some part become designers themselves, this is what we're talking about. Online communities that have the tools and the power to make things themselves and exchange it. So it's, if you like, DIY culture, pro-am. It's also been called mass innovation, mass creativity. All of this language has been used in recent writing about this area. And it's about us and the things that we make being translated into tools rather than products. Things that other people can use to make the things that they want. So it's really handing over, you could say, part of the design process to the user, giving them the tools to make things themselves. So if you line this up and start going across some of these different rows, and I've done it just to give a little flavor of what these changes are, then we can see, if we look at each area in terms of a sensibility of design, we can see its kind of nature. So here we are in terms of interaction, computer-human interaction sitting here, and I think we are very, very closely linked to this area here. So here on the right is the world that we live and occupy and will be shaping. This is, I think, where we find ourselves. The question then becomes one of, can we do this with the level of quality that is exemplified in the extreme expertise of craft? I think the system has hung. This is the transparency that we so need, the dynamics that I so don't have. I need some technical help here. Here it is. It's slow. Why is it slow? How much time does a machine need to think? Okay, I think it's slightly back with us. Anyway, what this diagram really is intended to show, and I will show by example now, is that as this history, which is really one of design history, has evolved, the mentality of each period has been exemplified in the technological artifacts that have been created. So I'll give you some examples. I just pulled out one or two. Here is, I call this the birth of internet. It's an absolutely fantastic image. This is in the 17th century, and this is called the reading machine, the reading machine. And I don't know whether you can all see it. This is Athanasius Kirchner, who talks about combinatorial logic. He was almost a computer scientist before computing science was there. This machine has a book on each of these paddles. So when you rapidly need to look at other information, you just paddle it round to look it up. So the spinning wheel can spin to any point. It's a kind of, not quite random access, but it's an informational device. And what I find so fantastic about it is that in some way it does actually anticipate associative thinking and internet in the 17th century. And it's a beautiful example. Someone built one of these. I've seen photographs of an actual machine. Very handy for revision when you need to read a lot of books. So this is Athanasius Kirchner, whose works are very, very interesting from the point of view of information design and computing, in fact, when we examine them in this kind of way. I don't know how many of you know this intriguing pair. This is Electro and Sparko. 1938, they launched themselves into the world. I think it was at the World Fair in New York. 12 foot high. He's an enormous robot, very heavy, of course. And what is interesting about these examples is they're made as objects. So the category that I called objects, they are not interactive. They're just programmed automatons, you could say. But they came out and went about their business in the world in New York, and I do believe that Electro was invited to certain very exclusive dinner parties in New York, where he was pre-programmed to come out with very good jokes, one-liners. And as the height of sophistication at the time, in terms of his design, although it may seem incredible to us today, he was a smoker. And this is where you can really see that the mores of the time, the thinking of the time, is what we consciously or unconsciously include in the things that we make. This was acceptable. This was sophisticated even. This could be expected in somebody that was a world personality, such as he was intended to be. He needed to be able to smoke at dinner parties. So the specification would include it. You can see him even in the specification. He has been drawn smoking. And there's the wonderful drawing of Sparko. Long before Ibo, we have Sparko, who lived the life, the social life in New York all of those years ago. And then if we take an extreme of product interaction in the very, very, very early days, then this would have been typical. We can all, I think, are we all old enough to remember things that looked like this? I think so. These are some of the early remote controls for any device, of course. It's not software, it's hardware. Every option had to be on the device where you could see it. And so it's almost like a page of a book. The product graphics would have been extensive for any device that looked like this, because every button would have had to be annotated. And so it was like looking at a page of a book, except you could press some of the buttons. So this is not interactivity as such. I think this is almost product design-driven interaction. Given that history, what is the opportunity that we have today? We can reinvigorate our own history. That's why we're in Florence. We can look at Brunelleschi's tower, we can look at the materiality of the world around it and use it for our own purposes as a kind of craft. So we will take our sensibility, the interaction sensibility, and repurpose all of those different things. We will look at craft again, we will look at materiality again in areas such as tangible computing. And we will look at product design from a completely new sensibility. So instead of the linear progression, we can start from here and look back, appropriate and accommodate it. for example. We want to move from a history of what I've called smooth automation. Somebody like Electro was automated. They weren't interactive. And I think we all know the difference between these things. The world in which things are programmable, predictable, finished, perfect, closed. The closed world of perfect design as object. That's what I call the product sensibility. Anything to do with trying to finish things and make them perfect and stable does not apply, I would propose, in our world of interactivity. It's simply impossible to do that because the nature of our discipline is such that it's always dynamic, it's always open-ended, and we leave things open to change. So we have moved the debate in computer-human interaction from ideas of smooth automation to one of dynamic improvisation. So again, to use the musical metaphor, I would say it's not classical music, it's jazz that is now the reference. It's unstable media, it's material, immaterial, unfinished, to some extent imperfect, changeable, upgradable, updatable, renewable. This is the world that we live in. And so the interactive sensibility is one in which we make things that have certain qualities like this, or words like this. Unstable, immaterial, material, unfinished, imperfect, open, changing, dynamic. So, in order to reconfigure practice, we'll understand that historical practice, we'll see its potential, we will imagine new possibilities and articulate system solutions. The other change in our discipline over the 20 or 30 years since I've been involved in it is the move from product to system, of course. Networked computing, again, has changed everything. How do you imagine systems that are that big and that unpredictable? One or two small examples. If you look at the world of craft, as I proposed, we go back and we reconfigure practice. In Glasgow, at the Glasgow School of Art, where I work, we have the Centre for Advanced Textiles, where we will use any image-making sensibility, from graphic design, from painting, from illustration, and the classic textile sensibility, and we will mix all of that together and print. And when we send to print, we are sending to cloth, silk, or cashmere, or wool, or whatever it is. We have huge printing machines where we will print. And we print for all of the big fashion houses and textile designers, but we also print in order to research. And in this area, what we are researching is mass customization of textiles, so that people can use open source software to design their own textiles and be able to print them. And if we can make clothes like that, then we're, in a sense, almost going back to advanced textile design being a craft again. We can make our own, we can make things for other people. So this is an area of very high experimentation at the moment. Again, it's typical of our field, I think, that we're looking for tools to give to other people so that they can make the things that they want to make. So this is textile design, obviously using digital manipulation in the imagery and then printed and made into products. Would not have been possible without going through the interactive sensibility. This is one of my students from the Royal College of Art, Michael Gollum, who won the Audi Foundation sponsorship for his work in innovation. And what he did was he took a scanner. The black thing you see at the back is actually a normal scanning device, and he fixed it to this old camera, and he took photographs with it and recorded it. And the reason it was interesting, and the people who were most interested, were the photographers, because he really invented a new way to create an image. And the image had never been seen before, but he used computing. He reprogrammed all of the drivers in the scanning device to make images such as this. I don't know if you can all see it, but you will see that something strange has gone on with two people who were sitting in a theatre. I think they are dancers. And as they moved, because the scanner takes a time to actually configure the whole picture, every part of their movement was registered. and you get the most extreme photography, the most beautiful and surprising outputs by using very old technology with very new programming. And so he has been busy with his scanner camera, again sponsored by Audi, to develop this as a photographic technique. This is pure hybridization of the old and the new and the experimentation in the way that I've been proposing. And it just looks absolutely fantastic. If we look to the future, then we join up two things: the world of programming, that used to look like this. I remember when everything was green and black. And internet. How do you visualize internet? It's usually like this. We can't see it, but we think of it like this. Why is that? Why do we think it looks something like this? This is a question. I'm going to do some research into this question. Why do we think it looks like this? Somehow we think it looks like this. We've all seen the historical pictures, I know, with the nodes and the networks. But in terms of programming and internet, this is where we now can turn our attention into the future. This is what we're linking now. Many of your workshops and areas of interest, the link between the socio-cultural change and technological multiplicity. This is the relationship between interaction and what I call transformation. Transformation design, this new emerging area, you're doing it even if you don't call it that, is to do with giving people tools, allowing them to make things for themselves. It's also been called mass creativity and mass innovation. There's quite a lot written about this in the UK at the moment. It's a fairly substantial movement to investigate this. Open tools, open source, everything related to this area where we can build and make for ourselves. So can we as a design community make things that are highly sophisticated but simple enough for other people to be able to use and make the things that they want to make? In this field, we're actually also, in a sense, training people to do things for themselves. So the focus here is on capability design. We could call it something else. We could say it's allowing everyone to be a designer to the level that they want to be. So if we configure this, then this is what it means. This is what we do already. We try to understand people and see their potential. We imagine not possibilities as designers. We don't have to make the end solution. We imagine their possibilities to create. It's a slightly different point of view. So instead of looking at the user, can you look at the user as creator and imagine what they would like to make? So we're involved in a cascade, you could say, of creativity, of imagination. The designer would no longer be the person that comes with, inverted commas, solution. The designer is somebody that would come with a box of tools for somebody else to use. Articulating enabling tools. Some people have also described this area as the creation of creative communities. You can see the recursion in the argument already. In Scotland, we are looking at this in rural areas where the economics of traditional industry has meant that a lot of those industries are in fact dying. And so we are looking at ways in which network technology, for example, in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, the most remote areas, the most remote communities, can be networked together in order that they can become, again, a generative and a creative community that can be economically sustainable. Another very important point for them. So here's the field. I think this is the field for our week this week. It's a challenge, but I think all of the things that I've seen so far map in different ways onto this. So from an interaction point of view, we're reinterpreting tradition, we are making hybrid products, we are extending the field of our practice, and in fact, in transformation design, we are distributing that practice. So we will be making crafted products, services, systems, and creative, connected communities. It's good to be in Florence with this as subject matter, is it not? This is absolutely fantastico. What would we be rather doing than looking at these kinds of topics? This is what I believe we're all going to be doing today. I've just lifted off the Kai program the menu for today, or some of it at least. I just put this in because you can see that some of the things that I've referred to are indeed what you're all doing. Stories and memories, socio-cultural impact, learning support, the Renaissance panel, the roles of creative synthesis in innovation, from usability to user experience. We talked about experience design. So all of this is indeed our material, all of that whole dimension of interactivity and transformation. And if we look at the full Ruis window, again, I've made one of these chaotic diagrams, but it does have a structure. This is our week. This is our whole week. These, again, are just the names and titles of everything lifted off the program here at CHI and mapped on. And it's very interesting. I started clustering them up, but there were so many overlaps that it became, I would need to make, I guess, about 100 of them for it to make sense. Visualization, user experience. I love the one that I've put in the middle here. I don't know if the person that's running the session is here. I am here, where are you? It's called, I am here, where are you? So again, just to show by a different visualization of a program that everything that I've referred to, maybe in a slightly different language, is what is going on here this week. And if we can just recall the start of the presentation, then I would think that we would all agree that, and I noticed the awards that were given today, that we are designing for diversity, designing for people that are not like us, designing for all different kinds of people. We will use digital as the material of invention, and we will use that again to make a socio-cultural impact, and we will create communities. This is what design leadership in this field is about at the moment. A lot of the words and descriptions about what is going on in design has a feeling round about these different subjects. Design for diversity, material of invention being the craft of the digital, and connecting communities together. And then, of course, we're in Florence. We're not all from Florence or Italy, indeed. Many of you have traveled a long way to be here. And as a community, we are therefore a global community, and we will design for that global community appropriately. And some of the work that I did in the last 2-3 years was for internet in rural India, where it was fascinating to learn and to come up against, in fact, the models and ideas that we have from a Western point of view, and how that is negotiated or should be changed or completely scrapped when we are dealing with the sensibility and the cultural history of India, for example. So, in our program, we will have multiculturalism, of course, inclusivity and inclusive design, and identity, the bottom right quadrant in my Ruis window. Whose identity? Who is the designer, and who are we designing for? And last but not least, I think we're all quite aware that sustainability of human and material resources are one of the greatest complex problems that we have in our world today. And sustainability, again, as we know, is defined in terms of its 3 areas, not only ecological, but social sustainability and, of course, economic. So again, taking the reference from the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, we will try to link social sustainability in communities that are dying or where people have moved away with economic viability and a concern for the environment round about. And these ones are familiar: valuing human resources and researching new materials. I think what is interesting in the move into transformation design, the examples that are here, and I know that there are people from various companies who are already making work in this area. If we look at the democratization of technology with things like Facebook, MySpace, YouTube, the whole exchange and barter that is created through online communities such as eBay, we can start to see the instantiation of that kind of world, which is an empowered one. So, to conclude, in Florence, the land of innovative technological and aesthetic sensibility, Here we are as a computer and human interaction community, applying those same sensibilities to our work in a global setting. I would like to propose that in the experiments that we carry out, that some of these different sensibilities can be done perhaps with reference to the city as the laboratory that is round about us. We're not always going to be in this building this week. We will have the opportunity to taste some slow food, to play with the dynamics of our own time, and to refresh ourselves and create a balance in our week, which will bring your own creativity to this conference. So it's with that wish that I thank you very much for your attention and for the invitation to come and speak at CHI. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you around in the coming days. Thank you.